M.N. Roy moved away from Marxism and then proposed what is called new humanism. New humanism, also called radical humanism. What is meant by humanism? Humanism refers to keeping human being or man as central entity for whose well-being any system is created. Man is the end. One may think, are there any people, are there any systems which are proposing where man is not the end? M.N. Roy thought that there are indeed certain systems which are making man an instrument of something that is bigger than him. Okay. For example, idea of nation. Okay. If you are glorifying nationalism and man is asked to sacrifice for the sake of nation, then man is not at the center. This Roy would reject. But nationalism was rejected not only by Roy, but by any Marxist. But in the place of nation, Marxists proposed class. So they glorified class struggle, thought of society in terms of classes, and ultimately the proletariat class should establish communism. So, and for the proletariat class to establish communism, there needs to be a party, which is Communist Party. Okay. The idea of the class and class struggle is Marx's idea. The idea of a party to bring that struggle into communism is Lenin's idea. Okay. So Lenin thought that the party should represent the proletarian class and then bring the socialist revolution. Okay. So all these things Roy was exposed, and Roy had first-hand experience of how things could go so drastically wrong, because he saw what Stalin was doing. Okay. So he came to be disillusioned with Marxism and Leninism. Okay. So it was in that context he proposed this new alternative, which he called new humanism or radical humanism. Okay. Roy's point is that Marxism glorified class, and to protect or champion a class, then party came. And then they went on doing certain things in the name of creating a socialist state, which resulted in the destruction of man, man destroyed. So Roy asked, what is all this for? If all these systems are not for the well-being of man, then what is all this for? So he said, in any ideology, we should give centrality to man and not to class and not to party and not to nation. Okay. So man is to be sovereign, be it society or nation or anything, is to help man. And help in what way? Help him to be free. Because Roy felt the essence of human being is his search for freedom. Okay. So, and Roy felt that pursuit of freedom called for a sense of control in oneself. That is, he can shape things using reason and having certain values, moral code. So with ethics and rationality, he is supposed to pursue freedom. And the purpose of education is to create such men. Okay. So in that sense, that Roy was dismissing all intermediary structures. He was making man as the end, the final goal. Okay. Not class, not nation, not party. Okay. So he was rejecting communism, and he earlier rejected parliamentary democracy because he thought parliamentary democracy was only empowering few rich people and not people in general. So when he was disillusioned with Marxism, he didn't move to parliamentary democracy and appreciate it. Instead, he continued to be critical of parliamentary democracy. And when he became disillusioned with Marxism, he proposed a completely new alternative, which he called humanism. Okay. So let us see what he said in this context. He disagrees with Marx himself. He says historical materialism is not true. Okay, because materialism itself is not true. I categorically reject the view that ethical values cultural patterns, and movement of ideas are mere ideological superstructure raised to justify established economic relations. This school is materialism, which Roy rejects. Nor history should be explained in terms of materialism. So Roy rejects historical materialism. Roy says history must be studied as a process of integral human evolution, taking into account mental, intellectual, and social process. So Roy is saying that history is not determined simply by material forces, and ideas too play a role, and they can play a very important role. And when ideas play an important role, which means Man should think and can think and shape history rather than thinking that he is simply subjected to certain inexorable historical laws. Okay. And here he rejects Leninism too. Okay. Because Lenin glorified party system. See that the individual, as power is never voluntarily abdicated, freedom for all is impossible. The collective ego, nation or class is invented to justify the perpetual slavery of the majority. Okay. And the individuality of its members was sacrificed at the altar of the collective ego of the party. And a party is the archetype of a society it proposes to build. So freedom is sacrificed at the altar of the party. Then he says, delegation of power to a small minority means abdication of power, as had happened in Russia. In the name of class or nation, the party became a new ruler. The proletarian state became its vested interest. Okay. So, rejected historical materialism, rejected role to party. And then he says certain things about what we should strive for and what is the relationship between the individual and the society. He says, political thinking had emphasized the state. The social welfare was considered as something bigger than mere sum total of the welfare. No progress or prosperity can be actually experienced except by individuals. So only individuals matter and not the state. It says no freedom, no welfare, no progress or prosperity can be actually experienced except by individuals. Individuals. And says individual is prior to the society. And society is the means for attaining an end, which is freedom and progress of the individual. All these quotations are taken from two books, Beyond Communism and Politics, Power and Parties. And what is the highest thing in man? Freedom is the supreme value because the urge for freedom is the essence of human existence. Okay. So, man comes to be the center and not other things. Then if man is at the center, then what kind of political structures? Okay. Then he would go for if a man is critical of bigger structures, then he is more likely to think in terms of small scale societies. Small scale societies. So Roy thought of local republics like Indian villages. Okay. Because if it is a small scale, then direct democracy is possible. Direct democracy is possible. So democracy can be participatory. And then Roy thought there will be many villages like this. Okay. And they approximate the entire society. And state would be very weak or less important. Okay. There is not much for the state to deliver. Okay. So, of course, reduced or disappearance of the state is there in Marxism, and in Gandhism. But Marx came to this position through communism, but Gandhi came to this position through village republics only. So in that sense, Gandhi's ideas and Roy's ideas are more or less the same. Okay, though Roy was critical of everything of Gandhi, including a thing which Gandhi was famous for, that was his ideology of non-violence. Okay, M.N. Roy thought that non-violence was a way of controlling a movement which would otherwise turn very radical. But then when he came to propose his humanist ideas, the end seemed to be very much close to Gandhi's and Marx's ideas. Okay, so let us look at this. This is just what he said. For local republics, he said, the state will not then be able to become an all-powerful leviathan, because state power will be decentralized, being largely vested in the local republics. In other words, the state will in this way become coterminous with society. Okay, this is closer to Gandhism. Okay, and what happens to the state? Then the time will come when a centralized leviathan can no longer pose as democracy, but a democratic state composed of a number of local democratic republics will rise, in which direct democracy is a reality. It will come into being not by passing of laws, not by imposition from above, but because local democracies will be in existence as a political reality and give the impress of their structure on the state as a whole. Okay. But what is the problem with this idea of local republics? I would say there is a general problem with an idea of no state or a weak state, which is proposed by Marx, Gandhi, and now Roy. What is the problem with this? The problem can be in terms of a security situation. For example, you have village republics, okay, and a weak state, and then nearby there is a strong state. This strong state will attack with the weak state and decimate. So why will this survive? So these so-called village republics should be in a position to defend themselves against a strong state. So how will these village republics defend? That is not possible. So when you are thinking of a political entity, you have to think in terms of defense aspects. Of course, one can argue that everybody should be like that, but how do you ensure that everybody will be like this, even if this society goes for village republics? What is the guarantee that the other society will, or some other society in a distant land will be like this? So wherever there is a strong state, it can come and invade these stateless small communities and then enslave them. So Marx's ideal, Gandhi's ideal, or Roy's ideal, they don't take into account that some powerful force can come and then invade. In fact, that is how state emerged. State did not emerge because people held one assembly and then they said we will have a king from now onwards. It is not like that. State emerged as a way of offering external defense to a set of communities. So you need a state, which means you need a large entity. And when you need a large entity, then it raises the question of how do you maintain that large entity? You need a large entity. So what is the relationship between the large entity and the village republics? Okay, then what kind of a system this large entity will follow? Then will it be socialist? Will it be parliamentary democracy? So by saying village republics is an alternative, Roy is not answering this question, because this is inevitable. There is no escape from this. Nor for that matter, Gandhi is answering this question. But the difference between Gandhi and M.N. Roy is that to Gandhi, the idea of village republics is just a fancy scheme, but not his central political philosophy. Okay, but M.N. Roy is making his radical humanism his central political philosophy without examining the real implications or practicality of it. So there is no alternative to state. So it means there can be more decentralization, there can be village republics, but there has to be a state, and there has to be an indirect democracy, because the big state cannot have a direct democracy, and it has to resolve the issues related to ownership of means of production and things like that. So the so-called radical humanism is not an answer to any of the questions that M.N. Roy was confronted with. Okay, like how do you rectify errors of parliamentary democracy? How do you rectify errors of communism? Okay, so M.N. Roy ends up giving very simplistic solutions, like how a man should be. This is again, this seemed very closer to Marx's views on communism. Okay, for example, M.N. Roy says, in an ideal system, see, there will be no contradiction between collective responsibility and individual liberty. Social obligations will be voluntarily undertaken and discharged in quest of individual freedom by upholding his or her potentialities. This is to say, by asserting individuality, each society will increase his social utility and thus contribute to the sum total of collective well-being. This is like Marx's statements on from each according to his capacity and to each according to his need. So man contributing according to his capacity and taking according to his need. So how is this possible? So here he is saying there is no contradiction between collective responsibility. Why will there be no contradiction? Some people don't want to work, they should be forced. Some people want to use what others have made, and there should be regulation. So, like Marxian communism, this again is just wrong thinking about what man is made up of. Man is made up of aggression, power, and many other things. There is no guarantee that if man uses his reason and wants to be free, then he will create an ideal society. It's not like that. And so you will see statements like this. Okay. New humanism is cosmopolitan. A cosmopolitan commonwealth of these two statements are from New Humanism Manifesto. New humanism is cosmopolitan. A cosmopolitan commonwealth of spiritually free men will not be limited by the boundaries of national states, capitalist, fascist, socialist, communist, or any other kind, which will gradually disappear under the impact of the 20th century renaissance of man. Radicalism thinks neither in terms of nation or class. Its concern is man. It conceives freedom as freedom of the individual. All noble statements on what man is, what man can be. Okay. So, finally, how can one look at this radical humanism? In my judgment, there is nothing radical about this humanism. Okay. You know, in Telugu films, one hero is called Rebel Star, and another hero is called Power Star, and another one is called Superstar. Like that. Somebody's nationalism is called spiritual nationalism. I don't see what is spirituality, and here it's called radical humanism. What is radicalism? Here is this. So they're just giving the fancy names. Either they themselves are giving or others are attributing to them. So what is radicalism in this? Some kind of thinking without taking into account human nature, without taking into account so much of history that already happened, and not paying attention to the really extraordinary things that were going on in front of his eyes, that was gone this non-violent struggle. But let us see how M.N. Roy could have addressed this issue, or how we can think about things differently. We can agree that human beings should be at the center. So humanism. Okay. So we can take a stand, nation, or a class, or a party, or I would say even religion, or the means to the end of man. Agreed. But then society requires all these things, nation, class, party. Okay. But it is about our man's relationship with these concepts is what is important. Okay. So he needs to have a nation, but he should know what nation can be and cannot be, should be and should not be. So he should understand what kind of a nation he requires. He is not for the nation, obviously, and nation is for him. Same thing about the party. Party is for him and he is not for the party. But But there are also occasions that man needs to give himself for a larger entity. There are occasions where a small entity has to sacrifice for the larger entity, but the larger entities are ultimately for the welfare of man, though that is agreed on. So it is all about what kind of a nation we create, what kind of a class conception we have, what kind of a party we have, and more importantly, what kind of individuals we are. So we need to understand what is to be an individual, what is the nation, what is a party, what is it for. So we need to accept individuality, individualism, as well as the intermediary structures, and need to understand their limitations and their um, use. Okay, it is not that only man exists and there is nothing in between man and the universe. That is not true. Like man is real, groups are real, his religious group is real, his class is real, his nation is real, his caste is real. Okay, groups are real, man is real, group identities are real, man's identity is real. It is all about what kind of identities and what are the limitations and the possible misuses of these identities, which we need to understand to create a healthy society. Okay, so that was what M. Roy should have pursued. So, in my judgment, I rate M. Roy's humanism very, very unimaginative. He had been unimaginative as a terrorist and as a Marxist, and when he was proposing something of his own.